am the one that had no choice in this, right? You know, like when you realize, like, you know, my adoptive parents had a choice. They chose to adopt. My birth mother had a choice, even though in some senses she didn't. But there were still choices made, right?
Right.
That weren't my choices.
That's right.
I mean, I'm the only one that completely had no choice. So I realized that, like, in reunion, I can choose who I have relationships with and who I don't. You know, so I realized it's okay. Like, I don't need to make this work with my birth mother.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and on today's show is Alison. She called me from Massachusetts. After the adoptive father that she loved so much died, Alison learned her birth father was looking for her, and she took it as a sign of good things to come. Sadly, she found herself disappointed in him and later in her birth mother, whom he had contacted without telling her. However, after Alison took legal action to gain access to her adoption records from the agency who refused to turn over her information, she finally laid eyes on the detailed context of her past that means so much to her, and only her. This is Alison's journey. This is Alison.
I just want to tell you that I found your podcast not that long ago.
I always like to hear how the show is impactful for people.
And I shot you an email after the first one I listened to. She interviewed your friend.
She's talking about one of my lifelong buddies, Andre, whom I featured way back in my very first episode.
And he actually used this person named Sheila Frankel in his search.
Yeah.
And at some point in my journey, she helped me in actually getting my unredacted adoption record.
Are you serious?
So that was kind of a small world thing. I was like, oh my gosh, like his story was so much like mine.
Holy crap!
And then
that's
so
amazing.
I've listened. Yeah, it was amazing. And then I've just been listening. I'm not done, but it's impressive how many I've listened to. I'm always plugged in.
Oh, that's really cool.
I just can't believe you did this. Like, it's so good.
Thank you.
And there's so many people like us, and we need to hear each other's stories. So, so I completely appreciate it. It's really good.
Oh, man, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And now here we are. Alison is episode 85. Crazy how time flies in this small world of ours. Anyway, Alison's parents had tried to have children for almost 10 years before they adopted her older brother, Bradley, in 1961. She was born in 1963 in Boston. 2 years later, their mother gave birth to their sister after 15 years of infertility. Alison said she always knew she was adopted, and her parents always made it special and tried to normalize it. So much so that their sister...
My sister actually had voiced, like when we were young adults, a little bit of sadness that she wasn't adopted.
Really?
My parents made like such a big deal about it that she always felt like, well, who's going to make a big deal out of me,
Mm-hmm.
So, like it was, funny because she is important and we all love her. And, but she was just kind of like, I just wish I was also picked out special.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the vernacular back then, which isn't used now in adoption. But that's, kind of how I think, parents were kind of coached to share that with their adopted kids.
That's interesting. I never really thought about that. There's a lot of discussion online and with folks who are, considering adoption or who have adopted and how they should treat their adopted children. And, I have mixed emotions about sort of having a birthday for the child and I hate the word gotcha day, but the idea of bringing the child home, like the day that we became a family, because if you are just trying to be normal, like constantly raising it can actually keep it at the forefront of your mind if you want to just forget and just be yourself. And I hadn't really considered what it means for a biological child of the parents to have to endure that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah, it was really a thing for her. I mean, she wasn't joking. It bothered her.
Yeah, I could see that.
So
yeah, wow.
Yeah, me too. And on the flip side, I was actually, one of my struggles being adopted was not so much the longing for my birth parents, but I just wish that I had been born to my parents that adopted me. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just wish I was just theirs.
Why? What did you feel that made you want that?
There's some othering, I think, that happens when you're adopted. So, for example, like we were super open about adoption in my family. And so if I would share with somebody, like people would always comment. So there's 3 of us, and people would say, "Oh my gosh, you guys don't look alike." So we would, if whoever it was in my family would say, "Oh, that's because, Alison and Bradley were adopted and Candace wasn't," or whatever. And people would often say like the weirdest stuff, like, "Oh my gosh, my brother used to tease me that I was adopted, and I was so upset. I was hysterical until my parents told me that I wasn't." Like, like it was seen as this like awful thing to be adopted.
Yeah.
Or another thing that happened to me is when, so my dad, he's my adoptive father, passed away when I was 17. And it was awful, and we were really close. So I had this part-time job at a department store, and I'd gone back to work like a week after he had died, but I was still a mess. And so I had gone like to the break room and to the bathroom to kind of collect myself. So I was, in the bathroom, like in a stall, like kind of, crying and wiping my eyes. And these two coworkers, who were also teenagers, walked in, and they were talking about me because they didn't know I was in there. And one of them said, "Oh my gosh, Alison's so upset about her father." And then the other one said, "I don't know why she's so upset. He wasn't even her real father."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's like little things like that I just didn't like. I didn't like that I didn't feel different in my family, but I know that other people saw me differently.
Yeah.
And I didn't care for that.
Yeah, right.
I didn't like. Yeah,
that's like
so
what I was saying.
That was sort of it.
You just want to feel normal, and if you're constantly reminded of it, it's kind of annoying.
Right.
Alison followed up by pointing out that their 2 youngest children are also adoptees, and they love making a big deal out of the day they were adopted too. They were older at the time of their adoptions, so they know when it's their special day on the calendar, and it doesn't hurt that they receive a present too. She said they talk about the memories of when the children first arrived in their home, just like a natural child likes to hear about their own arrival into their parents' world. She said she even loved to hear the story of her own arrival into her parents' home. They went to pick her up, forgot the diaper bag, and of course, she pooped everywhere.
And I loved it. I loved that story. I loved, I always pretended to be embarrassed that they would, talk about that.
Right.
Pooping incident. but I loved that story. I loved that, like, this is how you became our story. This sort of was, because I had no idea about my own birth. So I think I liked that.
When reflecting on her parents, Alison gushed over how amazing they were.
So my parents were just completely lovely. Like, they're both gone now. And, but I can't overemphasize, like, how truly great they were as parents. Like, just like super loving, really affectionate, completely dependable, really good listeners. I never felt any sort of discrepancy between like how my brother and I were treated and my sister. I felt like we were a really good family unit, and it was a very normal, growing up years. It was good. It was really good.
But she said her brother was incredibly defiant toward their parents, and he had some problems that may have stemmed from his adoption. His substance abuse began at a young age, so he has struggled. There are times when he can't necessarily be involved with the family because he's off doing his own thing, but he and Alison are still connected. So I wondered, if things were so good in her home, what made her search for her biological family? She said she didn't search, but she definitely would have. Alison had all of the classic curiosities that adoptees have about whom they look like and what personality traits they got from each parent. Her parents gave the kids their non-identifying information, but it was very generalized, and she learned later not a lot of it was true.
Yeah, super general. And also later I learned out super not true. Like, it talked about my birth father's family being that he was young and completing his education. And the truth was, he was away at reform school. He was a kid that was in a lot of trouble. And also that his family was well respected in the community. And that was also not true. He grew up in chaos. He grew up in, like every housing project in Boston. He was one of, I think, like 7 kids with 6 different fathers. And a lot of abuse and awfulness. Like it wasn't, like I'm reading, owned his own business and well respected in his community. I mean, that's just like a flat out lie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and that was typical then. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I just think like that was just, they tell the adoptive parents a good story.
In 1982, Alison was in college where she had a friend, a redhead, freckle-faced woman named Tara, who was also adopted, had met her birth mother, and Tara and her birth mother looked just alike. When Alison learned that Tara had called her adoption agency when she was 18 and learned there was a letter from her birth mother waiting for her, Alison was envious of Tara for having completed her search. She went to the payphone in the dormitory's hallway to call her own adoption agency because she just knew there must have been a letter waiting for her as well.
Because weirdly, I just always assumed that my birth mother loved me and was sad to have had to give me up, and that she would I just felt like she must have wanted to know, and that I was okay or in any of it. So I called the agency and talked to somebody there, and she said, "No, like nothing there." And I was like, kind of like, "What? How can that be?"
Yeah.
And I was like really disappointed.
Not knowing what else to do, Alison just moved on. She married her current husband, Kurt, after her college graduation in 1983. That same year, she broke out in a severe case of psoriasis that covered her body from head to toe. It was her second such episode in her life.
I went to a new dermatologist, and he, of course, asked for my family history. And I felt so angry that I didn't have history. And I was used to that. I mean, my whole life, I'd say, no, I'm adopted. And this time it really hit me, like, how unjust that is to not have information like that. So I was angry, and I called the adoption agency again. And I talked to this woman named Mrs. Kelly, and I said, listen, I called like a year ago. I know my birth mother, never didn't put anything in my file, so I'm not looking for that. But what I'm looking for is medical information. And is there any way you have more medical information about me or can get it for me? Because I just need to know these things. So she said, well, Alison, let me look. And so she said, I'll call you back tomorrow. And I said, okay. I'm not expecting anything, right? And so she calls me back, and she said, Alison, I need you to sit down. I said, yeah, okay. And she goes, you're not sitting down, are you? And I'm like, no, you're like, what? No, I'm not. Just tell me what you need to tell me. And so she said, I really need you to sit down. So I sat down, and she said, your birth father called here 2 weeks ago looking for you.
Wow.
And I was like, what? Like, and it wasn't like I was 20. So it wasn't like a trigger age, like 18 or 21, those,
Yeah.
And it was like just 2 weeks before I called, and I wasn't looking for anyone at that point, although I always wanted to know. So there's no, that's just a fact. I wanted to know. So she said, are you interested in meeting him? And I was like, yeah, of course I am. I've never met anybody I'm related to by blood. And then also, interestingly, time-wise, my dad had just died in 1981. So it's 2 years. Yes, so it's 2 years. We're still really grieving my dad. When I was in seventh grade, he got cancer, and so he had to have his leg amputated, and the cancer had spread, and he ended up dying 5 years after he was diagnosed, and it was awful. And my family, he was our rock, and I was very close to him, and it was really horrendous when he died. Just this huge loss. And so all of a sudden, there's this guy looking for me who's my birth father. And I thought, this might be good. I mean, I, not even for a minute, felt like, oh, great, I have a new dad, right? Like, nobody could replace my dad.
Right.
But I did think, like, this guy's got to be pretty solid. Like, here he is looking for me. Like, he doesn't have to do that. He must have missed me. He must have wanted to know about me. Like, I just felt like this could be really good. Like, he must be. If nothing else, I was sure he was a decent guy because he was looking for me.
Oh, yeah.
And, so she said, I said, yeah, I definitely want to meet him.
So the social worker said she would meet with Alison's birth father, Tim, follow up with her, then arrange a meeting with the three of them. Alison said in hindsight she thinks the intermediary was trying to warn her that Tim might not be the kind of man she was expecting to meet. The woman told Alison that Tim was 35 years old. Keep in mind, Alison was only 20 at the time. He was 15 when she was born. She continued with a forewarning that he struggled with drugs and alcohol and had been in trouble with the law. He has several kids with different women, but he claimed to be stable at that moment, and he wanted to meet Alison. Wait until you hear how bizarrely this first meeting went.
So in my head, like initially when she said, your birth father wants to meet you, I pictured an adult. Like I pictured somebody that was stable, somebody that, like the kind of guy that would put on a jacket and tie to meet his birth daughter. That's what I pictured.
Right.
Because that would be my dad.
It's also sometimes hard not to create a surrogate for the father that you already know. You probably pictured someone who was like could have been one of your father's peers. Because it's hard to
100%. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I totally did. Like I was hopeful. Like I really didn't want to replace my dad, and I didn't think he wasn't replaceable, but I really felt like this might be really good for me. And so anyway, so I she was kind of like asking me, I think, in her own way to lower my expectations. And, but I still was like excited on the day that we were to meet together. I remember like getting dressed and like I wore, this is 1983. So I wore like a skirt and a blazer and nice shoes. And, like I picked out pictures that I wanted to share with him. I figured he wants to know everything, right? I mean, he's looking for me. Mm-hmm. And, so I like picked up pictures and I like mentally did highlights in my mind, like the highlights of my life, right? Like what is he going to want to know? Kind of like, like thinking it through so I wouldn't be tongue tied. And I remember riding. So I took the T, which is like the subway system in Boston, mm-hmm. and, the trains too, but I was on a train. And I remember like looking at my reflection when I was in the T and thinking, I wonder if he's going to think I'm pretty. Like I really worried, like I just wondered how he would see me and accept me and if he would like me, and I was super nervous.
Yeah.
But weirdly, I wanted to go alone. Like my husband's just the best. And he was like, I'll go with you. And I said, no, I've got this. And he goes, I can wait in the lobby. I just, want to be there for you. And I'm like, no, I've got this. And I always felt very independent about that. Like, like this is my thing. And so I went and, it was a wreck.
Really?
And I was in a room. I was like, really, it was just like, this is the first time, and I know you've been through this, that I'm going to meet someone that I'm related to biologically. Like, it's huge. So she put me in a conference room, and then a couple minutes later, she brought Tim in. This is my biological father. So, I'm sitting, and he walks in, and he's like, so he's got, like, long hair, and he's wearing a leather jacket and a T-shirt and jeans. And he like looks at me and he looks real young. I mean, he's 35, but he looked really young. And he's like, oh my God, it's like looking in a mirror. And, like he was so like floored, I guess, that, that he felt our physical resemblance was really strong. Mm-hmm. And then he goes, can I touch your face? And I was like, like, I think that's something only blind people do. And, like that's so weird,
it's
right?
Really
and I was
intimate.
like,
yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, why would you, like, we didn't even hug. And I was like, okay. And so he like, touched my face and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. You look so much like me. And, like, that was like really meaningful to him. Like he really wanted, like, he wanted to see that resemblance, and he did. I, on the other hand, was having a hard time seeing it, but I was a mess, like I was off balanced. I was like thrown by him, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe, like I see maybe, like maybe this, maybe that. So then he just, so after he touches my face and, he just, kind of, Mrs. Kelly, so it was that social worker, said, oh, leave you two alone to get acquainted. So he's like, he just starts talking. He said, I'm trying to think how we started. He started with, I'm an alkie. And I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. And he's like, I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he said, I'm, clean and sober. And, talked about that a little bit. And I was like, okay. And then he said, so it's crazy, Alison. I couldn't remember your mother's name for the life of me. This is my birth mother he's talking about. And I said, okay. And then, then I did. And then I remembered, Jean. And I'm like, okay, like, it was just so crazy. And he goes, and he leans in and he goes, I just want you to know, you were conceived in love. And I was like, whoa. Like, I do not want to talk about my conception. Like, there's stuff I want to know, but my actual conception isn't on my list, right? Really, I don't want to know. And then so I was like, like, stop talking like this. And
I'm
then he
trying not to laugh, but that's.
I know, please laugh because it's funny. Like, right? That's so weird. Like the face touching, and then he's talking about my conception, and then
gosh.
So then he goes, listen, I think of you every September 26th without fail. And I said, I thank you. But I do need to let you know my birthday is September 29th. And he's like, he said the F word. And he's like, I can't believe I thought about you on the wrong day all these years. I thought about you on the wrong day. And then he goes, you want to know why that is? That was my sister Patty's birthday. And I'll tell you something about her. She killed herself. So this is like, seriously, this is the stuff he's firing at me. Yeah, she killed herself. And this is him talking, in the car, in the garage. She killed herself. And then you know what? 2 weeks later, my brother Alan did the same thing in the same car. And so this is this is our first conversation.
So Tim is rattling off things about the family. Alison is a mess, and her head is spinning from all that he's hurling at her. He finally takes a breath, and Alison asks about her birth mother, Jean. He recounted how she was a nice girl from a nice family. Too nice for him, and they hated him by his own account. They met when she was 17, he was 15, and they were in a church youth group in Boston. Her family was heavily involved with the Methodist Church, so Jean was involved in the youth group, but Tim was involved for the opposite reason. He was constantly in trouble, and the youth group was intended to be an intervention to help him straighten out. Jean and Tim started seeing one another outside of the group. Through all of Tim's rambling, Alison was still glad to hear her birth mother's name from his mouth and his recount of how her birth parents had connected.
So then at some point, Mrs. Kelly came back in, and she said, how's it going in here? And I'm like giving her like the big eyes, like, help me. And Tim goes, it's great. It's amazing. I mean, we're like really hitting it off. And she's like, okay, great. All right, I'll give you some more time. And she shuts the door. And then he just kept talking, and he never asked me anything about myself. Like not one thing. Not where did you grow up? What were your parents like? Did you have any siblings?
Yeah.
I had pictures in my purse. I had stories in my head, and I didn't share any of them with him. It was just bizarre. And then so he just kept talking, and my heart's really pounding, and I'm trying to process this. And I'm 20, and I have no Facebook group to turn to. I had no prep. There were no books about this. Like, this was just a whole crazy experience.
Right.
And so Mrs. Kelly came back in and said, listen, we're closing up here. If you guys want to meet again here or get together on your own. He's like, we'll get together on our own. Okay.
Will we?
But yeah, what is that fact? And so he goes, where are you parked? And I said, actually, I took the T in, and he goes, I'll drive you to the T station. I said, okay. And he said, but first, do you want to come to my house? So he lived in an apartment real close to the adoption agency in Boston with his then wife and 3-year-old son. Do you want to come meet my wife before I drive you to the T station? And I said, yeah, okay. And so we did. So we went into his apartment, and I met his wife, and she was nice, and she asked me a couple questions, which was cool because I was like, finally, somebody wants to know something about me. So we talked for a couple minutes, Kathy and I, and she was nice. And then he showed me his son. So his son's sleeping in a playpen in the middle of the living room, and I'm looking at him, and it's weird because Tim it's like he couldn't connect that his son was my brother. Like he'd always just be like, my son, it was just weird. And so I'm looking at him thinking, in my head, this is my brother. This is my half brother. I am related to this little tiny boy. I'm trying to make this real.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really feel anything. I just thought that was a big deal. And it just felt so weird.
Instead of driving her back to the train station where she arrived to meet him at the adoption agency, he drove Alison all the way back to the station where she originated her journey, where her car was parked. She said she's not sure why she let all of those things happen because she wasn't completely comfortable at any point. In fact, she could smell marijuana in his car, and she wasn't convinced he wasn't high when they met. when she saw her husband, Kurt. After the meeting, he asked how it all went.
It was good. And he's like, it was? And I'm like, yeah, it was good. I didn't even know how I felt. I didn't know what to think.
Yeah.
And so I started telling Kurt, like, I got some information, and that was really helpful. And he was nice, I don't even know I didn't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it sounds
and
like
I
it was such
also
a crazy, bizarre experience. But you also
It was bananas. I also felt embarrassed. I felt like I had some responsibility for this. Like, I opened this door, and what did I expect? So, and I think that's stupid now. I don't think I'm right, but I felt some shame, like I felt ashamed, honestly, that I was related to him because I thought he was so, bananas. I felt ashamed that I agreed to meet him because it was clearly a mistake. Although I wasn't sure how clear I was on that at that point, but I was starting to admit to myself that this wasn't right. And then I also felt super sad because it made me miss my dad. I was just like, how can this be that I had this great dad? Like, how could this be my biological reality? How?
Yeah.
Because I just can't even believe it.
Lending some context to that era in her life, Alison reminded me that she and Kurt were a young couple. They had no money, so they didn't pay for caller ID, nor did they have an answering machine on their landline phone at home. You remember those days when you couldn't screen your calls? You had to answer the phone with an exit strategy in mind if you didn't want to speak with the caller. Tim would call their house, and he would just talk and talk and talk about everything from the neighbors to his AA meetings. But he never asked Alison about herself.
We continued to talk on the phone, but that was always and I never called him, super stressful for me. I realized how much I hated it and how I didn't want to have contact with him. And I would do things like those long phone cords that they used to have before cordless phones. It's we had a really long one in our apartment, and I would stretch it out to our front door, and I would ring the doorbell, and I would say, Tim, I've got to go. Paperboy's here. I've got to pay him, or whatever it was. I'd just try to get off the phone as quickly as possible.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just crazy.
Within that year, Tim called at some point to drop the news that his wife had taken their son, Alison's brother, and moved to Florida. He admitted he had been drinking again. At some point prior, Tim shared with Alison that he had been married before and she had a half-sister out there, but he and his ex-wife were not on good terms.
She doesn't let me see her. I think she's fine, but he didn't really have any knowledge of where this daughter was or what she was doing, and that disappointed me a lot. I just felt like, why are you trying to be my father, in air quotes, and you're not even a father to the kids that are yours? That's a joke.
Yeah.
And it's just all awful. And so, at some point that came clean with Kurt, my husband, and said, this is just not what I was hoping for. And I am absolutely not going to look for my birth mother. I am done with reunion. It's not for me. And he was like, that's cool, Al. That's cool.
So how old were you when you reached that conclusion? You must have been about 22, 23?
No, it was still probably in that first year.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because Tim and I had known each other about a year, and he called. So he called one night, and the other weird thing when he would call here is go, "Hey, sweetheart," and I hated it because I hated that he assumed that I knew who it was. And I felt like it took and I did know who he was, so who am I? But I just I hated it, and so he called, and my heart drops. I'm like, I just can't with this, and he goes, "Listen, I just got off the phone with your mother," and of course, for me, mother is my mom who raised me. So I'm like, why would you call my mother?
Oh, yeah.
He goes, no, not your adoptive mother, your real mother, which also kind of goes right through me, right?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so I was like, uh-huh. And he said, and she lives in California. She got 5 kids. She's going to call you in an hour. And I was like, what? What? Okay. So he had tracked her down, I guess, for me.
Holy crap.
And, right?
So you're on the mental outs with him and trying to get away.
I'm done, yeah.
And he's bringing more. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy.
It was awful. Yeah, it was awful. And,
wow.
I'm like, oh my gosh. So this is so, and she's going to call me in an hour. So you have this hour where, like, I mean, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I was like, this is the person who gave birth to me. Like, this is a different ball game, as far as Tim, it's hard for me to muster up any strong feelings for him. But Jean, I felt like, I mean, she gave me life. I'd like to talk to her. Like, but I also, like, prayed she wasn't like him too, right? And so, I was real nervous, and so the phone rings, and I say, hello, and she's like, Alison? And I said, yep, and she started crying. And then she said, I love you. I have always loved you. I want to know everything about you. I was like, oh, okay. Like, it was great.
Wow.
And so she was, she was normal, which was sort of the bar for me now, like, just normal, all I want. And we talked on the phone for a long time, and, a lot of it's a blur, but she, asked me, a lot about, like, my family and where I grew up and if I was happy. And I was able to, tell her, yeah, it's been great. And, talked about my family. And then she said, what do you want to know? And I said, I want to know what time I was born. Like, why this was my first question, I don't know. Except for when I was growing up, that was, like, one of the things that always made me feel adopted. Like, for some reason, my friends would all be like, I'm going to be 10, but not until 12:45. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I had that, too.
Yeah, so it's like it's awful, right?
Yeah, and I didn't realize it until I was an adult. And then I was like, wait a minute. She told me what time it was when she gave birth to me. And then I was like, I never knew that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like just a little fact that other people know.
Yeah.
So she told me what time I was born-ish, because she said, they kind of, back then they did that twilight sleep and, they knock you out. But she's like, it was in the 10 o'clock hour at night, like, that was enough for me.
Alison wanted to know everything, and her birth mother shared openly. Jean was forced to go to a home for unwed mothers when she got pregnant, and the adoption was forced as well. She shared the name of the hospital where Alison was born, finally setting it apart from the multitude of hospitals around Boston where Alison guessed she could have been born. And she told the story of the nursing staff who was there to support her birth.
The nurses at the hospital weren't particularly kind to her. And there was one nurse who was really young who was really nice to her, and she would bring me to her every day. And so she was able to hold me and change my diapers and, feed me and be with me. And that was, like, really important for her. And
that's amazing.
It was amazing, right? Like, that's so nice to know, like, that kindness of that one nurse.
Yeah, sure.
Made such an impact on her.
Jean has been married twice and has 5 children as a result. Learning all of these facts and having this great conversation with her birth mother felt right, more like what she expected from a reunion. It's a lot easier for people to communicate today than it was back then in those pre-internet days. It used to be cheaper to wait until after 10 p.m. to make a long-distance call. And there was no email, so sending someone a note meant you were physically writing and mailing a letter. They talked on the phone sometimes, sent letters back and forth, including pictures from moments in their past lives, and it was really cool. It was great to see pictures of her siblings, but Alison was disappointed that even though there were 5 of them, she didn't really look like any of them. In time, Kurt and Alison scraped together the money for a cross-country flight from Boston to Riverside, California, to meet her birth mother. It's a long flight. And when you're sitting next to someone for several hours on a plane, sometimes you strike up a conversation, like Alison did with the older couple near her. They asked what was taking her to California, and she said,
and I said, I'm actually going to meet my birth mother for the first time. And they were like, oh, my gosh, this is crazy. So they said, as we got closer to landing, they're like, we'll take pictures for you. And I said, that's amazing. That's so nice. So I gave them my address. And they had, I had a camera, but they said, no, we'll use ours. We're comfortable with it. We'll send them to you, I promise. And so as we went to get off the plane, the woman of this couple goes, and we were toward the front, but she says to everybody around us, let Alison off the plane first. She's going to meet her mother for the first time.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
So it's crazy. So they were all like, oh my gosh, of course. So I got off the plane first, but all the people that were around us on the plane circled us and cheered when I met her. So she was there.
God.
So she was right there when I got off the plane, with her husband. And it's so this couple, they were taking, the wife was taking, or the husband, I don't remember, were taking pictures. And then all the other people were clapping, like they were clapping. And then like when they left us and like, Jean and I were hugging, and it was great. It's like, yeah, but we had an audience. So which was like so funny. And, like even as they left us, like people didn't just leave and walk away. They kind of like rubbed my back and like, good luck. It was so funny. Like, but it was, it was amazing to see her. I mean, I knew what to expect because I had sent pictures and she had sent pictures to me, and it was emotional. It was a real thing, like this person carried me and gave birth to me.
Alison stayed with Jean for 5 days. Jean's kids were, of course, younger than Alison, so they did some touristy things like go to Disney and Knott's Berry Farm to pass the time and to bond. Many nights, Alison and Jean just talked into the wee hours and asked one another a lot of questions and got a lot of answers.
So it was good, but a couple things happened that were like a little weird to me, like, or uncomfortable. Like one thing was we'd, I would go do errands with her or whatever, and she would introduce me to people. And so she'd say, this is my daughter, Alison. And so I'm talking, if the person I was talking to, started a conversation with me, and if I said anything about like growing up in Massachusetts or, like anything that sort of like said, that showed that I wasn't her, that I was her birth daughter, not her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Jean would like shoot me daggers, like with her eyes. And I was like,
really?
What? Yeah. And she like did not like that. And like later she said, that makes me uncomfortable that you do that. And I was like, I didn't know it was a secret. I really didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hated that. And then another thing she did a lot was, and I kind of think like this, it was a rookie move. Like I didn't need to forgive her, I guess, but she just kept claiming things about me. Like she'd like I was wearing shorts, and she'd go, oh, you have knobby knees. You got that from me. Like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that. Like I don't like being picked apart and claimed, and even it was like, not just like, like, oh my gosh, our eyes are the same color. Like that's normal, right? Like, and I think we did have that moment. We did have the same color eyes, and that was okay. But it was like everything. Like she'd say, do you like to read? And I say, I love to read. Well, you get that from me. And I thought, like, back off. Like I didn't get everything from you.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. And so I didn't like it. And then I sort of made a rookie mistake too, I think, in that when I talked to her, I didn't talk about my mother very much. I talked about my dad. I think partially because he had, he had died, and I missed him, and I had so much, like I had a good relationship with him, and I also, I sensed she was vulnerable and uncomfortable about my mother, because when she did come up, she would get kind of cringy, and so I like kind of made a mental note not to talk about my mother too much. And so, but I did say, like something real, it was real normal. Like, I was always close to my dad, but my mother and I would butt heads a lot, especially when I was in high school. And, that's like normal. That's normal stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah. And so later, so I didn't know it at the time, but later she kind of used that information like as a weapon against me. So, like there were a few signs during that first visit that maybe this wasn't going to be smooth sailing after all. So
was if I understand you correctly, I feel like you're saying your mistake was not speaking more equally about both of your parents with your biological mother?
That's right.
And why, I felt though? Because you said that you detected from her that it was uncomfortable for her. So why do you feel like that was your own mistake if you were picking up a signal and you sort of made a course correction?
You're right. You're kind of making me feel better about that mistake. I don't know. I just, I think it was a mistake because later it came back to bite me.
Alison fast-forwarded a bit in her story. She said they continued their relationship over the years, speaking by phone, visiting one another, but at some point it got strange between them, kind of uneasy. Jean seemed to be moody sometimes, critical of the things Alison said, and Alison felt like she just couldn't say anything right. It's around 1999, and email became a widely used communications tool, so their handwritten letters were gone. Jean started emailing links to birthmother websites.
And they were like super angry birthmother websites. And they talked about things like, our babies were stolen from us, and then our babies deserved mother love, not just material advantages. So things like that. And she'd send them to me. And I was like, why are you sending these to me? Like, this is not for me. This is for you. Like,
Yeah.
I get her anger. I get how unfair things were for birth mothers in that era. Like, I understand her pain, but it wasn't my pain. And the whole thing that it said, our babies deserve mother love, I was ripping angry like crazy. Like I had mother love. I had mother love. I had a mother who I loved, who loved me.
Yeah.
I didn't lack for that. I didn't long for that from her. I had that. And so I just kept deleting them, thinking, she's just bananas. And so she called me one day, and she goes, and I remember like so distinctly because so at the time we just had two girls that are biological to us, and so my older daughter was 10 and she was wearing a softball uniform. That's why I remember how old she was.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was 7, and they're sitting at the table eating chicken nuggets and we're trying to like go because one of them had a softball game. And so Jean calls and she says, did you get a chance to look at those websites? And I said, I did. And she goes, what did you think? And I said, I don't like them. And she said, why? I said, I had mother love. Like, I don't understand why I don't know what you want from me. Why are you sending these to me? And then she said, listen, I know you really loved your father and that he had a huge influence on your life, but what if your father, and I know this is crazy, she said, but what if your father was able to raise you with me? That's crazy, right? Like, is your jaw dropped?
Weird. Why would you say that?
It was super, right? It was awful. I was like, so I said, I don't know what I said to you that would make you think saying that to me was okay. I love my mother. I had a great mother. Like, why would you say that to me? Mm-hmm. And she said, you know what, Alison, you're very difficult. So I was, and I said, that's probably true. Maybe I'm difficult. And then she said, you just make everything so hard. It's so hard to talk to you. And then I said, well, I'm not particularly enjoying this conversation either. And I was mad because at this point my girls had both like dropped their forks and they're staring at me like, what is happening, Mom? So she said, sometimes I wish I had never met you. And I said, that can be arranged. Let's pretend we never met, and hung up on her. And I was like shaking mad, like I was shaking. And because I remember my oldest daughter, who's super sensitive, was like, Mom, are you all right? What happened? And they knew I was talking to my birth mother, and they had met her before too. And they called her Nana. And although we lived a distance apart, so they didn't see her a lot, there wasn't a closeness there. But and then my younger daughter was like, that's not fine. That's not fine that she talked to you, because that's not okay that she upset you. Like, she was really like protective of me.
Yeah. And
then I was just kind of I had to pull myself together and be like, all right, guys, let's get in the car. It's time to go to the game. And but I was just so upset.
That was the beginning of the end for them. Now, I said Alison fast-forwarded a bit, so now let's go back. Before she met Jean, she met Jean's brother, who lives in New Hampshire, right up there in New England near Alison. She said he's just a great guy with a great wife, and they have some great kids.
So she would say things like, oh, I know you're really close to Rob and Kathy, but you don't want to be close to me. And I was saying, it's not that I don't want to be close to you. I don't know how to be close to you. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to make this work. Because it's everything I said, she would twist around. Like one example was when I met her, my grandmother lived with us when I was growing up. We had an in-law apartment at our house, and I was close to her. And so when I met her, we had all these great, long, heartfelt conversations. One thing I had shared with her is how my grandmother had this really big fear of our birth mothers, like mine or my brother's, coming back for us. So she actually said, I remember her saying, Alison, I just always had a fear that woman would come back and try to take you from us. And so I told Jean about that, and Jean was fine. When I told her, it was no big deal. But later, if I said, something, my grandmother, she would go, oh, I don't like your grandmother. She called me that woman. So things like that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
How the relationship turned?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
it's like everything started being twisted, like weaponized against me.
She felt like she just couldn't navigate a relationship with Jean. Then, after all they had been through, Jean finally revealed something that Alison never could have known. It was the day after their big blow-up, where each agreed it was better to act like they had never met.
She called me the next day and begged me to not cut her off from her life. And then she goes, I talked to my psychiatrist, and she said, you're right, and I'm wrong. And I said, psychiatrist. And she said, yeah, I have bipolar. And she had never told me that before. We've been, we've been in contact for years.
Wow.
And she said it just like that. And I thought, and obviously, I'm thinking, okay, this makes sense. And it's obviously not being managed properly. Because I could kind of see the sort of, dramatic highs and lows of her personality, during over the years, I was like, okay, this makes so much more sense. But that's how I would find things out, in this real backdoor way.
Mm-hmm.
So we never really could, it just didn't turn out, it started out strong and I thought it was going to be great. And then it couldn't say anything. It just didn't work. And then I also at some point realized I am the one that had no choice in this, right? When you realize my adoptive parents had a choice. They chose to adopt. My birth mother had a choice, even though in some senses she didn't, but there were still choices made, right?
Right.
That weren't my choices.
That's right.
I'm the only one that completely had no choice. So I realized that in reunion, I can choose who I have relationships with and who I don't. So I realized it's okay. I don't need to make this work with my birth mother.
So they haven't broken up per se, but their contact is minimal now. Alison and Jean are friends over social media, but even that has gone wrong. Things that feel normal, like casual commentary online, get misconstrued and overblown. So Alison blocked Jean online for a while, until she begged not to be cut off from Alison's online life.
And so she had posted this thing about, it was stupid, but it was this stupid thing about how she hates when people say that her daughter looks like her. And I kind of wrote back to her, and we were friendly, not close, but friendly. And I wrote back to her the thing is, Jen, she does look just like you. And, you embrace it. Embrace it. If you were adopted, you would completely enjoy that resemblance. You just would. And so she was like, so Jen wrote back, so the sister, and she said something like, no, she's not like me. Her essence is so different. It was just something. It wasn't anything. It was stupid. And, but then my birth mother chimes in and she said, I agree with both of my daughters, although only one of them allows me to call her daughter.
Totally unnecessary.
Yeah, and public.
Yeah.
Right? So and that's how it always has been, I try to normal with her and I can't, just try to be normal. And it just, anything that feels normal, like a casual comment to my half sister gets twisted into something else.
Yeah, it turns into something.
So, so I ended up kind of inboxing her on Facebook saying listen, we can't be Facebook friends anymore. I can't. That was awful. And then again, please don't cut me off. I'll only look at your pictures.
I realized while we were chatting that I didn't have a feel for the overlap of finding Jean and whether Alison's mother was still alive at the time. She said her adoptive mother was still with her when she found Jean, so I asked how she had shared everything with her mother. Let me ask you something else.
That's kind of where we are. Yeah.
Did you, was your mom alive when you found your biological mother?
She was.
And how did you share this with her along the way, and how did she take it?
I gotta tell you, I didn't talk to her about it very much. And it's kind of a regret I have now, about that. So I had told her, so when I met Tim, my biological father, I told her, and she was and she was cool. That's good. You need to get your medical information. I think that's important. So she was kind of for it, but not enthusiastic about it. She wasn't, she didn't call me before, good luck, or call me after, how'd it go? You know what I mean?
Right.
I really think it made her uncomfortable. And then so when Tim found Jean for me, I told her, and she was like, oh, that's good. You'll get more pieces to the puzzle. I'm not sure I'm right about this. I felt at the time she didn't really want to engage about it. So I didn't talk about it very much. I did tell her, after the trip to California, I came over, as I do often, and she said, how was California? But not how was your birth mother? How was California?
Yeah.
And I said, it was incredible. We went to Disney, and, I started talking about all this stupid stuff that didn't have anything to do with meeting her. And she didn't push me for more, so I'm not sure she wanted to know more. But in hindsight, I really wish I could talk to her about this now. I wonder if she thought I didn't want to tell her more. So I'm not, I'm not sure I handled that right.
She sounds like she was treading lightly, hoping that you would share more. And like you both were sort of pushing and pulling a little bit to try to figure out who was going to share, and neither did, so you didn't.
Yeah, that's completely right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's completely right. So we didn't. I mean, and even like my sister, who I'm close to, she didn't ask me a lot either. She was just like, I would tell her, and she'd always be like, "Cool, yeah, that's cool. That's good that you know that." Like, not unsupportive, but not super curious. And I think she just felt like protective, like we're your family, and you're my sister. You've always been my sister, regardless of whether we're related by blood. Like I think she was maybe a little uncomfortable sharing me.
Yeah.
So I never really was that forthcoming with my adoptive family about it. And although to fast forward, and this is so I've been in reunion for 35 years. I think things have finally kind of come full circle. So this summer, our youngest daughter got married, and so at a table at the reception, just at our house, we had a big tent in our yard, and it was fabulous. But at one table sat birth family from both my biological father's side. So he has a brother that I'm very close to that I met after he died. He had a sister that I was actually really close to. She came to my other daughter's wedding, but she's since passed away. My uncle Rob, who was my birth mother's brother, was at the table with his wife and his kids. My cousins were all grown up and have kids of their own. My brother, that I was raised with, my sister that I was raised with, they were all at one table. They all ate together. They danced together. It was such a moment for me in a day of moments, looking over at that table thinking, look at that. That is my family.
Alison said at that wedding, she just decided to back off from trying to protect everyone's feelings. So she sat everyone together at the table, and it worked out great. But did you hear what I thought I heard? It sounded like Alison said Tim was dead. She told me the story of trying to separate from him and how she learned of his passing.
I had at some point said, listen, Tim, we can't talk all the time. Like, I can't do it. I have a family, and this is hard for me to try to navigate a relationship, and I really care about you, and I'm glad I've met you, but I can't all the time talk to you. But I will always send you a Christmas card, so make sure I always know where you live, and I'll always send you a Christmas card, which I always did up until he died, which is kind of important in how they found me after he died. And he was cool about that. He was always cool. Like, as bizarre as he loved me, and he was really kind to me. Like, he was, he wasn't what I wanted or expected, but he was not mean. And so anyways, he called me out of the blue in like 2000, and he said, "Hey, I'm living in Wareham," he says. And I'm like, no, what? And yeah, I'm close to you. And I just got out. I was incarcerated, but I'm, it was a whole story. Like this is normal, like I was incarcerated, now I'm out, and I'm living with some friends, and I'm like right near you. Do you think we can get together? And I said, I'm going to have to call you back. And, so at this point I have kids, and, it was crazy. And I felt like panicked, like, why? Like, why is this coming back now? And, why am I having to make a choice about Tim again? And so I went next door, and our neighbor was the chief of police. And I said, listen, can you tell me anything about somebody? And, and he said, yeah, what's his birthday? And I give it to him. And so he calls me the next day, and I tell him, listen, Walt, this is not my father. I had a father that raised me. He was my dad. This is my birth father. His name is Tim. This isn't my, I just always felt like I needed to separate that all the time for people.
Yeah.
And so, and especially because and maybe I wouldn't have been like that if I was delighted with who my birth parents were.
Right. I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair. Right. So Walt, he calls me over the next day, and he goes, "You're going to want to sit." And I'm like, again? And so he takes this like fold. You remember like how computer paper used to come out of a printer, like all like perforated and connected to each other, that was dot printouts?
Dot matrix printers,
okay, so,
yeah.
Yes, so it's that, and he takes it, he holds it up to a ceiling, and it goes funk, 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 all the way to the floor. It was criminal record. It was humongous.
Holy crap! Wow!
I know.
Oh my God!
I know. I was like, oh my God, and I was like sick over it, like oh my gosh. And so, so this is what he said to me. He goes, so is this all my preface of saying, this isn't my father, that, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, hey, your dad's a pretty bad dude. You're not my dad.
Holy crap.
But people can't with that,
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh.
They just can't. Yeah. So he was like, he's a bad guy. You should stay away from him. And I said, okay. But then when I read the police record, it was like, he's a bad guy. Like there's no question. Like he did a lot of bad things, but it wasn't, like he didn't murder anybody. So that.
Yeah.
I guess.
Was it more
so, yeah.
the bad things that people do when they're under the influence, like just the bad decisions kind of thing?
Yeah, and things that people do when they want to get money and they don't have any for drugs. Those things, right? They're like breaking and entering and drunk driving and assault and battery, stuff. And so I ended up, connecting with Tim again after that, and I said, I'll meet you. I don't know, it's what gets into me sometimes. And so I met him. We met like at a Dunkin' Donuts, and I hadn't seen him in a long, long time. He had looked really different, and so I met him, and we both had, something to drink, and I don't know if we had donuts, and I said, I told him that I knew his, I had his record, and that I wasn't comfortable having him as part of our family, and he was real sad, and I was sad to tell him, but I also felt like it was right. I felt like a lot of chaos to add to my family that I'm raising, and to be honest, I didn't like him. I never connected to him. I never, you know what I mean? Like we didn't connect.
Yeah.
It was never good for me. So I just said, I'm glad I met you. I'm glad to have answers. I'm glad you're out of prison or wherever you were, and I hope you do okay, but I can't. And he said, will you keep sending me Christmas cards? And I said, as long as I have your address, I will. And so I did. So anyway, so in 2008, I got a call from his brother, Stephen. And he said, and I never met him or talked to him because Tim never connected me to his family. Like even his mother was alive when we met, and he never introduced us. Like and he threatened to. Like he would say, oh my God, you would love my sister Nora. She's so smart. She's a really successful businesswoman in San Francisco, and you would really hit it off with her. And I'd say, I'd like to meet her. And then he would never follow through with it.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was sad because so anyway, so I knew of his siblings, but I had never met them, and I missed the chance to meet his mom, which I would have liked to have done. And so Stephen called me, and he goes, Alison, this is Stephen Bunting. And I said, huh? And he said, I need to tell you, your father died. And I'm really protective about the language thing. And I'm thinking, my father, my father died in 1981. Mm-hmm. And, I'm like, oh, Tim died. And then I'm saying to him, I'm so sorry, because this is his brother, right? And although they hated each other and they didn't really have contact, but I said, and I kept saying to him, I'm so sorry. And he kept saying to me, I'm so sorry. Like, it was real weird.
Yeah.
And like, whose loss is it? No, it's yours. No, it's yours. And so I was like, what happened? And he died of, it was a combination of things, but the main thing was an overdose. And he was, he had just turned 60 years old. It was weird. So, I kept saying, I'm so sorry. And he was saying, I'm sorry. And then he said, my sister Nora wants to call you. She's wanted to know you for a long time, but Tim would never connect her. He never would give us your information. And I said, okay. We hung up, and my husband was out like a business dinner. And, so I just like was sitting there thinking, okay, so Tim died. And I kept thinking, I'm probably going to feel sad about this. And then I just didn't. And then I thought, maybe tomorrow I'm going to be sad about this, but I wasn't. And I wanted to be because just I'm a human, right?
Right.
And it's my birth father, and I wanted to feel something, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. I also didn't feel relieved, which I think is something. But I didn't feel. I just thought it was sad, but I don't know. I didn't feel anything.
The next day, Nora, sister to Tim and successful San Francisco businesswoman, finally connected with Alison.
She called me and she said, I have wanted to know you for the last 20 years, however long it was.
Oh, man.
And I was like, oh, my gosh, you sound so normal, which is my bar.
I know, right?
Like, I'm normal.
Well, when the bar is low, there's nowhere to go but up, right?
That's exactly right. And so, so out of this death, I found Stephen and Nora, and it was great. Like, they're both phenomenal people. They both had a horrendous childhood and really made something of their lives, I think, against the odds. And it was great, so go ahead.
I can't help thinking about the fact that he didn't connect you to his siblings. And it makes me think of that train ride that you had on your way to see him, where you looked in the mirror, basically, in your reflection and said, basically you questioned how much he was going to like you. And the fact that he didn't connect you to his own siblings, knowing that he was not a great guy and they were successful people. I think he limited your contact from them because he knew that you were going to be disappointed in him if you saw how everybody else turned out. He did that either consciously or unconsciously, but intentionally, you know? Yeah,
it was intentional. I completely agree with you. And it was a huge loss because once I met Stephen and Nora, and then I ended up only having like 8 years with Nora before she passed away. But we connected hard. Like, it was unbelievable. Like, just, like we talked on the phone a lot and we got together. Nora lived in San Francisco, but she's a few months after Tim died, they had a memorial service, just family really, at Stephen's house, which is like an hour from me. And I was able to meet her then and spend time with her then. And after that I went to see her in San Francisco, and she came here and we talked on the phone frequently. And between her and Stephen, I felt like they filled in a lot of holes for me, for why Tim was the way he was, which was really helpful. Like, awful things happened to him when he was growing up. And, not that excuses all of the bad choices, but it was helpful to me.
It gives you context to understand how people everybody's life has a couple of paths, and you choose one path, and then there's another set of choices, and some of the circumstances influence the paths that are available for you. And unfortunately, it sounds like he had some real tough circumstances that forced his path in a certain direction, and he probably made some bad choices. Yeah, that's completely true. Yeah, all
true. So it was helpful. That was helpful to me. Like, it helped me, it just gave me some peace about him. That's and cool. Also that like, I hated, it's hard for me to describe how much I hated that I was related to him. Like, I hated it. And then when I met them, I thought, no, I'm all right. There's good stuff there too, Yeah.
It's funny how we sort of ascribe our own self-worth to the people that we're related to, when in fact it really is kind of all about us. Like, your own individual identity is you. It's only you. Yeah. You can have. Yeah, I know how. True. I understand how people have sort of shame for who they're related to and all that kind of stuff. Right. But ultimately, it comes down to what people think and know about you. Alison said there were more relatives than Nora and Steve who have been important in overcoming her ill feelings toward being related to Tim. Her Uncle Rob on her birth mother's side was also a really nice addition to her positive reunion experiences. As things happened, Tim died after Alison's adoptive mother's passing. In the year after his death, Alison really felt an incredible longing to see her detailed adoption records. She said part of it was missing her own parents, and part of it was the fact that she had been through home studies for her own adoptees, so she knew how comprehensive and personal the information contained within them can be. Alison wanted to see her parents' answers to the barrage of questions a home study poses. That was her history, too.
I wanted that piece of history. I was like, I want my mom and dad in that place in that time. I want to read that. I want to see the questions they had to answer, what they said, what the interviews were like. Like, I should have that. I want that.
The adoption agency Alison was adopted through was closed, but all the records were transitioned to a place called the Home for Little Wanderers. Speaking to one of their social workers, Alison explained that her adopted parents were deceased. Her birth father was dead too, but she was in reunion and had everyone's identifying information already. So she asked the simple question,
what do I need to do to get my adoption records? And she said to me, there's nothing you can do to get them. They don't belong to you. They didn't belong to your parents. They didn't belong to your birth parents. They belong to the agency, and they'll be destroyed in 99 years, and it's not one thing that you can do to get them.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, right? Like no compassion. And I was so angry, and I thought, oh, you do not know who you're dealing with. Like, I will get them. and like, I am a pit bull like that. Like, if I want to know something, I'm going to find out. And like, I even found my brother's birth mother. Like, I find out everything. I want to know everything. So anyways, I ended up going to court and petitioned to have my unredacted adoption records, and the judge said, yes, you can have them. So then I called this woman at the Little Wanderers, and I said, listen, I have a court order. And she said, you seem to think that a court order means I'm going to give you the records. I'm not. She said, I'm going to present the court order to our legal team, and you'll hear back from us. So they fought me. They said, no, I couldn't have them. and I had to hire a lawyer and go to court, and like my lawyer against the lawyer for the Home for Little Wanderers to get access to my own information. So, you know, it was a big deal. But one of the funny things was that the lawyer for the agency came up to me like before the hearing, and she said, "Hey, I just wanted to say hi to you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And she like grabs my arms and she like squeezes them. She goes, "I hope you win today." It's like she's the other lawyer.
Wow, that's funny.
It was super cute. She's like, "I'm just doing my job, but you know, like you should totally have your information. Look at you. You're nice. You're a nice woman," she said. And I'm like, "I am."
Good for her.
It's just super cute. I mean, so she was great. She didn't put up any fight. The judge just said, "Listen, I've said this once, and I'm not saying it again." She didn't have her records. So anyways, I got my unredacted adoption records.
Good for you.
And they were mind-blowing, Damon. They were 100 pages about single-spaced, typewritten pages that was not only my parents' home study, which was just mind-blowing, like so sweet and sad, like, you know, like just seeing their struggle with infertility kind of firsthand in real time, you know, all the questions they had to answer, kind of how judgmental social workers could be, because they don't think anybody's ever going to read these, you know. And, you know, so there's a lot of kind of sad stuff in there. And, but it was really, the part reading about my parents was just took me back in time to before I was even born, to see where they were and how much they wanted to become parents, and how happy I am that they became my parents, you know. And but then the real amazing thing of these records was there was like close to 50 pages of stuff on Jean, my birth mother. So it had all these interviews with her at the home for my mothers. It had interviews with her after I was born. It was, you know, like it was all documented. Like there was a point where Tim, my birth father, found out that I had been born, and then said to her, now mind you, he's 15, that he was going to marry her and they were going to get the baby. And I was still in foster care at this point. I hadn't been placed. And so they went into the adoption agency. It's all documented, you know, like they want the baby back. And, you know, it's like a whole thing, like they met several times. And, you know, so this social worker very wisely, you know, kind of redirected them, and they ended up, you know, sticking with the adoption plan. But, you know, like it was just a lot of really personal things, and the struggles that Jean had after that was all documented. She had met with Jean's parents, and they were really worried about her. And by the time, you know, the records ended, so it was over a period of like more than a year, she was pregnant again with another child that she also placed for adoption, which she did tell me about at some point after we had met, that she had another baby that she had placed for adoption. So it was like, you know, but it was like really like seeing the journey and sort of the sadness and her longing for love, really, you know, documented in real time. That was like really like invaluable to me to really feel for her and what she went through.
Yeah,
it gave me a lot of compassion.
You know, we started this conversation talking a little bit about, or at least in the middle, we said something along the lines of, you know, a lot of these decisions were made absent our own input. And it's helpful then to see this historical context and to understand then how people got to the point that this adoption happened. And it's more than just seeing your birth name on your birth certificate. It's more than just seeing the date and time that were factually accurate. It's about all of the decisions, as I said before, the path of someone's life and the choices that they make along the way that end up putting them in a place where you are relinquished and are with your parents. That's important historical detail, information, and knowledge about yourself that's invaluable.
Yeah. No, it's so crazy, because I remember saying to that social worker, so let me get this straight. You right now could open my adoption records and read every word of it, and it means nothing to you. But it means everything to me, and I'm not allowed to read it. She said, that's correct.
God, that must have been infuriating. I know that lit the fire. I know that lit the fire.
Yeah, it was. And then that was crazy. So that's how I ended up. Remember, I told you at the beginning of our conversation that Sheila Frankel, who helped your friend in his adoption journey, I ended up connecting with her like through the social worker we used to adopt our boys. And I had said to our social worker, like, listen, help me out here. What do I need to do to get my records? She goes, I know somebody that knows everything. She said, don't tell her how you got her number. And then she gave me that woman's number, and she's the one that's like, hire a lawyer. I'm like, oh, I'm in.
Apparently, Alison is never satisfied on her quest for information, so she sought the records for a time when Tim was in a reform school called the Lyman School. Unfortunately, the records were in disarray, so Alison couldn't get what she was looking for, but the archivist gave Alison the phone number of a woman in a senior leadership position in the Department of Social Services. The agency had been involved with Tim's family for many years, and the woman gave Alison Tim's records.
So it really showed me a lot of the, really awful, like there was sexual abuse and physical abuse and like a huge amount of neglect and just a lot of awfulness and a lot of chaos. And so having those was another piece for me to kind of make peace with Tim also.
I
felt like finally, I think I understand you now. I think I know what happened. Like I don't think I'm mad anymore that you're my birth father.
Wow.
I'm okay.
That's humongous.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was humongous. Yeah. It was great. It was super helpful to me. So so that was pretty cool.
Wow, Alison, this has been like I told you at the beginning, every time I listen to someone's story, I make this prediction in my mind unconsciously, and I'm like, I know where this is going.
Of course.
You've just taken me down another path that I never thought I would hear, and this has been fascinating. I appreciate you taking time to share your journey. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It's been, it's my pleasure. It's been 35 years, and it's been, a lot of surprises and a lot of disappointments, but people ask me a lot if I'm glad I searched, like, although I didn't actually technically search, but like if I was glad I knew. And so it's been 35 years. I think any given year I would have given you a different answer. Yeah, I'm glad. No, I'm mad. Like I should never have done it. Like I never really, like I have no idea. But I think in the end, I think a bad truth is better than a good lie. So even though my birth parents were not what I wanted or expected,
yes,
it's still my story. And I'm glad I know it.
That's right.
And a lot of good came from it too, especially with the connections I've made with extended family members that are really just great.
I love what you just said.
So, yeah.
A bad truth is better than a good lie. I love that. That's amazing.
Just is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't all have those great stories.
That's true. They're real. They don't clean up well all the time. So, but
they don't. And also, like, had you interviewed me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay.
If you had interviewed me like a year after I'd met my birth mother, you would have gotten a whole different story from me. I would have been like, it's great. It's like life. It just keeps changing over time.
Well.
So anyway,
thank you so much for sharing your story, Alison. This is really unbelievable. But thank you.
Good luck editing this one, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. And I tell you what, I was just sitting there thinking that too. But I tell you what, I'm really glad that you said that last piece about seeking legal access to your records, because I feel like more of us need to stand up and say something.
Yeah.
And I feel like we haven't reached
a
critical mass of people such that it is really commonly, openly accepted that these are bits of information about us that we should have. And I'm glad. Yeah,
we should have. We shouldn't have to fight for it. Yeah. I agree. It's not cool and it's not okay.
Yeah.
People deserve their histories. Who is somebody else to decide we should know our own stories? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, totally agree.
It's funny because I wrote, but like on my my notes to talk to, I wrote really big, like tell him about finding my getting my original unredacted birth adoption records, because I really felt like I wanted to make sure people knew that that's something they can do, that's something they can fight for. I think it's important. But I appreciate you very much. I love your podcast. Keep going. Every story I love.
Thank you so much. All the best to you. Have a great weekend. Okay, Alison?
All right.
Take care.
All right. Thanks so much, Damon.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
Hey, it's me. Alison's story clearly underscores for me how important it is for adoptees to have access to their own information. I really liked that she took legal action and gained access to her entire adoption history, and I believe we need to laud these stories of legal triumph amongst each other to empower one another to change what is currently accepted when it comes to accessing our personal information. Gaining access to her adoption records, Alison learned so much context about her adoptive parents and where they were in their lives to adopt her, and where her birth parents were in their lives to be in a place to relinquish her. It also sunk in for me that the adoption agencies have engaged in some marketing of children they're working to place, changing Tim's narrative from trying to find his way out of trouble at 15 years old to being quote-unquote away at school. The psychology of the time, and may still be true today, was to make everyone look as good as possible to the people on the other side of the equation. Adoptive parents wanted to feel like their child came from decent stock, and relinquished parents were made to feel that the family their child was going to live with was ready to provide everything that the birth parents could not. To borrow Alison's words, a bad truth is better than a good lie. And there's one more thing about Jean and Alison that Alison wanted to make sure that you guys heard. Her words are these. One interaction that I had with her that I wish I had shared was when my mom died in 2007. I was completely devastated. I knew Jean would want to know, so I called one of my half-brothers to tell him and asked him to tell her. I also told him that I didn't want her to call. A few minutes later, the phone rang and it was her. And although I didn't think I wanted to talk to her, I picked up. She simply said, "I'm just so sorry. I know how much you loved your mom." Those words, they meant so much. I started to cry. I cried, and she just kept saying, I know. In a relationship with so many wrong moves, her calling me was exactly the right move. It was incredibly comforting and meaningful to have my birth mother comfort me as I grieved the mother that raised me. It was a good moment for us. I'll never forget it. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you'll find something in Alison's journey that inspires you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I, really? If you would like to share your adoption journey and your attempt to connect with your biological family, please visit whoamireallypodcast.com/share. You can choose to share your whole story, maintain some privacy about parts of your journey, or share completely anonymously. You can find the show at facebook.com/WAIReally or follow me on Twitter @WAIReally. And please, if you like the show, you can support me at patreon.com/WAIReally. You can subscribe to Who Am I Really on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, it would mean so much to me if you would take a moment to share a rating or leave a comment. Those ratings can help others to find the podcast too.